Tony Kinnett.
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 Host of the Tony Kinnett Cast.
Let's get down to business.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Here on the Daily Signal.
Well, hello and good evening. Welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast. I'm Tony Kinnett. It is now just 8 days until the November 5th election. And look, you can go to a lot of different places around this wonderful, sprawling, wide, festering heap of a media landscape. But where you should be going is our live coverage starting at 6 p.m. Eastern on that fateful Tuesday, just 8 days away. And then we will go until about 1 in the morning, and we'll pick up the next morning if the race hasn't yet been called, and we'll keep on going, and we'll follow that insane schedule until either our producers die from exhaustion or a winner is called. We've got a lot of great guests planned for the evening and a couple of other surprises, so head over to thedailysignal.com, or you can head over to the YouTube page and find all of that great stuff. The reason you're definitely going to want to hang out with us is because it takes every single analyst with all of the expertise in the world to dig into some of these toss-up races. And look, you might say, well, look, I know what the toss-up races are, Tony, and you know what? I'm okay with just knowing, hey, those races are, in fact, toss-ups. Well, what you don't know is that day by day, more states are being added to this insane toss-up category. Usually we just consider the swing states, the traditional swing states, to be kind of toss-ups. So you've got your blue wall swing states, you've got your Sun Belt swing states, and then you've got sort of Georgia, sort of North Carolina as well. Now we're possibly adding New Hampshire to the list. We might even be adding Virginia to the list. New polls out show that Virginia and New Hampshire are in toss-up territory. And I don't just mean the lower part of a race being so close that the polls are within the margin of error. There are several polls coming out of New Hampshire which now show Donald Trump comfortably leading Kamala Harris. Out of New England, that's pretty wild. And then, of course, Virginia as well. Now, this means a couple of different things, and some things not so much. So first of all, let's talk about what it does mean. The momentum right now is in the former president's camp. Donald Trump is going around doing rallies all over the country, not just in safe red Republican areas, but in the deepest blue areas he can find. We'll talk about that in the next segment. And he's connecting with voters of all creeds and backgrounds. Whereas Kamala Harris, who has run a very narrow campaign, all of a sudden really wants to appeal to a broader form of voter, but her campaign and the angry Gen Z and millennial hyper-left morons on her staff have no idea even how to define the other groups that she's trying to reach, much less know how to appeal to them. And this comes in a few different ways. And honestly, guys, when you think about the difference between Kamala Harris and Trump at this point, Trump is running a very disciplined campaign. He wants to win. He knows he could lose. And so he and his campaign are running a very disciplined, try not to make any mistakes at all kind of campaign, which is always good, especially for the Republican candidate, because Republicans are known for snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. We'll be talking about that a little bit later on the show as well. The problem with Kamala Harris is that her campaign is just bad. I mean, bad at everything. I mean, bad at giving Kamala things to say, although according to sources on the inside of her campaign, she says things that her staffers theoretically give her. Well, that would be, I guess, if Kamala Harris actually read what her staffers gave her. So her staffers can sometimes get things on the teleprompter, but like if they give Kamala Harris a binder, a big book full of information about an opponent, about things to say on the national scale, reportedly Kamala is just chucking out the binder and not even reading it. Which is not just hilariously pathetic, but it's also in direct opposition to what she just said at a CNN town hall, which sounded a little bit familiar to me. Maybe you'll catch it. So here's Kamala Harris trying to tell people that, she doesn't have answers for voters because she's a nerd and she does the research.
So I may not be quick to have the answer as soon as you ask it about a specific policy issue sometimes, because I'm going to want to research it. I'm going to want to study it. I'm kind of a nerd sometimes, I confess.
So the problem with that, as I'm sure you've already guessed, is number one, that she's never once been articulate about data or any kind of policy proposal ever once in her life. She has literally pulled her entire political career out of one of two places, her butt or Willie Brown's pants. Those are the two places that Kamala Harris, the current vice president of the United States, has pulled any kind of expertise in her political life. She was a horrible prosecutor. She was a terrible attorney general. She was a mediocre and extremely progressive senator, consistently embarrassed in committee hearings. And now she's the vice president. She's never once been articulate or presented data or findings of any kind. So that would be number one. Number two, this reminds me very much, almost word for word, of like the speech that Will Smith gave the financial advisors at the end of The Pursuit of Happiness. See if you can tell me if the Kamala speech sounds anything similar to this.
Can I say something? I'm the type of person, if you ask me a question and I don't know the answer, I'm gonna tell you that I don't know. But I bet you what? I know how to find the answer, and I will find the answer.
Huh. Just a little, interesting, fun stuff. I mean, hey, look, at least she's broadening the stuff that she's plagiarizing. Good for her. The reason that you need to take a look at how the candidates are doing is because the momentum right now looks very different than the momentum in 2020 and 2016. And this brings us back into the polls. So, Trump is up again in a national poll, which is wild. Republicans do not outperform Democrats in national polls. Like, you know that, right? Republicans do not outperform Democrats in national polls in the presidential ever. Since modern polling has become the kit and caboodle, that has not occurred. Now, here's where things get fun. When you start looking at the comparative data by state, right now in 2024, compared to 2020 and 2016, then you start to understand the perilous position that Democrats up and down the ballot are in. In 2020, Biden was up 7.5 points in the national. In 2016, Hillary Clinton was up 4.6 points in the national. Right now, Trump is up 0.2. That was an incredibly close election. In Wisconsin, in 2020, Biden was up 6.4, Clinton was up 6.0. Right now, Trump's up 0.3. In Pennsylvania, Biden was up 4 in 2020, Clinton was up 5. Now, Trump is up 0.5. And it basically works like this all the way down the list. Trump, by the way, is starting to pull away in Georgia. And this gets really sketchy for Democrats because how people vote in the presidential often ends up either a straight ticket or just for Republican candidates down the board if they end up voting for the presidential candidate. This puts a lot of Democratic races where they should have pretty comfortable races for picking up or retaining Senate seats. Things are now getting a little sketchy. So a new poll shows that in Michigan, the Democrat Slotkin and the Republican Rogers are tied at 48%. The Republican Senate candidate in Michigan is tied with their Democrat opposite. It's wild. It's wild. Races all around the country in the Senate are following the same kind of situation. So, Ohio Senate, Brown versus Moreno, very close, currently a toss-up. Pennsylvania Senate, McCormick and Casey, currently a toss-up. Wisconsin Senate, Hovde versus Baldwin, currently a toss-up. In Montana, Sheehy, the Republican candidate, is up 6.5 points. And then the Nevada and Texas Senate, the Nevada Senate is still kind of a toss-up, but it's leaning blue. Cruz is finally starting to pull away toward the Republican side in the Texas Senate race. The only Republican that is performing extremely poorly, as opposed to how Trump is doing in the state, is Kari Lake, which I called a whopping year and a half ago because Kari Lake's campaigning has been horrible. Kari Lake, very, very charismatic, but says really stupid things repeatedly. That has hurt her consistently. There was only one Trump, and it is Trump. On the meanwhile, you've got Kamala Harris, who is now so bad at this. In the last couple of days, Kamala Harris has been booed 3 times. Here's Kamala Harris being booed at a church in Philadelphia.
As a nation, we face real challenges. We carry.
So here's Kamala being booed just a day later in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
We are fighting for America's future, and we understand the opportunity.
And then, of course, Kamala advertised bringing out Beyonce, and, Beyonce shows up and, talks for 30 seconds, and all of these people who came for a Beyonce concert were shocked as Beyonce just strutted off the stage after speaking about 3.5 sentences. So this is the crowd leaving, and basically this weird kind of pseudo crowd brawl, because you have half the crowd who's leaving and is booing, and then you have the Kamala faithfuls who are mad that anyone would dare leave their glorious, glorious leader. I mean, just fantastic stuff. So best of luck. We're going to dig into why there is this kind of weird factionalism that isn't quite getting Kamala where she needs to be here in a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIPC.
Closing time.
I've been asked one question fairly consistently over the last couple of days. And by that, I mean, I think I've gotten like 7 messages across a couple of social platforms asking for my take because they're surprised, I guess, that I haven't mentioned this just yet, which, by the way, is always, it always kind of throws me for a loop that, you know, not only are people tuning in regularly, but that they remember things that I've said, which is, you know, terrifying as well, I guess, kind of as a form of accountability. The question is, why have the Washington Post and the LA Times not been endorsing Kamala Harris? Are they trying to mess her up? You know, is it some kind of a backroom deal? Or they just don't want to be embarrassed? And you know, when she loses, are they endorsed a loser? What's the deal? Well, we can add one more major newspaper company to that. That would be USA Today, or the good old Gannett newspapers. This would be the crew that runs the Indy Star, as well as several other blue dot, you know, or gray and blue text newspapers around the country. So they are also declining to endorse Harris. Here is the reason why. It is not because they think Kamala Harris is going to lose. It is not because they don't like Kamala Harris. It is not because there's some shady backroom deal. And no, though the media is desperately trying to claim otherwise, it's not because they're trying to curry favor with a future Trump administration. No. There is a significant issue in this country, and it has to do with something called overflow, and how Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have responded to overflow. It's even something that Joe Biden kind of did a lot better than Kamala Harris did. Now Joe Biden, after his blood red Einstach speech in front of Independence Hall, flanked by Marines, after you demonize exactly half the country, kind of harder to do this. Overflow in this context has to do with those that come to your event that want to get in, but the event is sold out, so they hang around outside. That's one kind of overflow. The other kind of overflow are individuals who are not directly the part of the demographic that you're trying to reach, but they're around anyway, and so they're part of your audience. Now, I have a lot of people, I've actually tried to define what my audience is a couple of different times, and it's kind of people in flyover country. Those who are not on the coasts, who are just the individuals who go to work and hang out with their families every day. Now, I do have some individuals that are on some of the coasts. For example, we're on a repeater station down in Pensacola, Florida. And so that's the overflow. Those are people who aren't necessarily who I'm very much always going for, but who are, in fact, tuning in anyway. Donald Trump loves these kind of individuals. Kamala Harris hates these kind of individuals. Allow me to explain. So, Donald Trump held a major campaign rally at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Now, New York City, as you may know, is very blue. It is very to the left. It is very Democrat. Trump went there anyway and held a huge rally. There was massive sellout. It was very successful. Even an ABC News guy acknowledged quite clearly that it was a massive success for the former president.
Look, I was there for about 6 hours yesterday. First thing I've got to say, Madison Square Garden was packed. People waited hours to get in. They sat through hour after hour of this rally. They were fervent in their devotion to all things Trump. Trump has created a movement. There is no doubt. I cannot think of another Republican figure of my lifetime who could have come into a Democratic city like New York and put together anything like that.
And that's a very crucial thing. In fact, it should be worthwhile and should be noted that this was one of the most diverse crowds that have attended a Republican presidential election rally. Just by looking at the crowd, because New York is a very international city, you have individuals from all different walks of life, from all different cultures around the globe that converge to hear the Republican presidential candidate. And there is something about this that should start to bother you, because there was the Harris and the media response to this, basically losing their minds and claiming that actually there was a 1930s rally with the American Bund, this Nazi group. Oh, they held a rally in like 100 years ago. Oh, dog whistles, dog whistles.
But that jamboree happening right now, you see it there on your screen, in that place is particularly chilling because in 1939, more than 20,000 supporters of a different fascist leader, Adolf Hitler, packed the garden for a so-called pro-America rally.
It's so gaslighting nonsense. You know who else drank water? Hitler. Okay, all right, good. It hasn't worked so far. Why not try it for the 847th time? You know, you've already shown that you're just going to call Trump Hitler. Nothing about his rallies, nothing about how you don't like certain things that he's saying, so they immediately go, oh, he's Hitler, he's Hitler, he's Hitler. Tim Walz said the same thing. Hillary Clinton said the same thing last week, just very overtly, Trump is Hitler. All right, good luck with that. It didn't work. It didn't shift anything in the internal polling. And so, what did they do? Well, they actually started complaining about the comedian that came before Trump. But I'm getting ahead of myself because, see, we've forgotten to mention that Bill Clinton accepted the DNC nomination at a massive rally in the 90s. And in fact, in Madison Square Garden.
I really love New York.
Huh. Oh, yeah. So, you know, let's not forget Barack Obama in 2016 speaking to a massive rally at the DNC in New York City.
She never, ever quits.
All those people screaming and chanting his name, holding up signs. Oh, it's just like Hitler, just like Hitler. By the way, even New York City Mayor Eric Adams came out and was like, guys, this is ridiculous. People host events in Madison Square Garden because it's like a historic place to hold events. Like doing something in Radio City. It's a big deal because it's a cool place to do something. That's it. If I ever got the chance to host an event in Madison Square Garden, would I do so? Absolutely. It's a cool place. It's got a lot of history to it, not just the Nazis. So now they're complaining about Tony Hinchcliffe, who is an insult comedian, I should point out, because he made a joke about Puerto Rico. Basically, he called it a floating pile of trash. Was it a good joke? No. Did the crowd roll over laughing at it? No. It was just fell flat. Now, a couple of things should be noted here. Does Puerto Rico have a serious trash problem? Yes, it does. Now, the right was just joke kind of sucked. But, insult comedians, they have good jokes and kind of bad jokes. That's what Senator Marco Rubio said. Sonny Hostin decided to clench pearls and say, well, actually, it was actually Donald Trump calling Puerto Ricans trash. So she gave a big tear-filled emotional expose on The View. I'm not going to go into it at the moment. By the way, Puerto Ricans who were immediately interviewed after they left the rally said they weren't offended and that it wasn't really a good joke. But, and they literally had flags with the Puerto Rican, or hat with the Puerto Rican flag on it. No, we didn't care. Just, insult comedians are like that. So that didn't work. And this brings us to why Kamala Harris, on the other hand, is having such a horrible, horrible time. This is because Kamala Harris, unlike Trump, who, if there's overflow, there's individuals in the room who aren't traditional conservatives, Trump tries to appeal to them anyway and bring them into the tent. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, she doesn't like men. Doug Emhoff has gone off about how toxic masculinity, if you're not this submissive little soy milk drinking goober, then you're evil and you're bad. And then not to mention the Atlantic writer from there recently saying that Hispanics were uneducated. That's why they were voting for Trump. Harris and Whitmer at a bar when they didn't realize the mics were on, accidentally let it slip that they know they're doing horribly with men.
Yeah. Oh, we have microphones.
Yeah, so we're trying to gain ground with men. They're struggling because for Kamala Harris' entire political career, the overflow, the people that she could represent, even though they may not agree with her, she's scorned them. She's called them all kinds of evil, nasty things. Tim Walz, same thing. Now you're in a national election in which there are a lot of swing states at risk. So Trump appealing to the overflow has been largely successful. And now the bill is pretty much coming due for Harris. We're going to talk about that in North Carolina in just a few minutes. We'll be back with Virginia Allen from the Daily Signal. We'll be back in just a minute. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on the Daily Signal, first out of 93 WIBC.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
I'm not quite sure if, when you're looking at the swing states, if we actually examine some of the kind of the various factors that go into not just whether an individual is going to make the effort to vote, but if any significant barriers in their way are not just causing them to go out or not, but if any of those barriers are causing them to perhaps change a candidate. We're on now live with Virginia Allen from the Daily Signal. She's out in North Carolina. Virginia, how's it going?
It's going well, Tony. How are you?
I'm not bad, not bad. So I want to make sure that we get the most out of your time in this particular situation. What do you see on the ground right now as we gear up in North Carolina, just 8 days away from the elections?
Oh, it is close. I am in Nash County, North Carolina. Nash County is in the 1st Congressional District in North Carolina, and the indication is that so goes the 1st District, so goes North Carolina. And Nash is a really interesting county because I am talking razor thin margins here. In 2020, Biden won this county by 120 votes. In 2016, Trump won this county by 118 votes. So this is a county that is really evenly divided, and in both of those elections, over 50,000 votes were cast. So it's a decent-sized county. It's located kind of on the outskirts of like the Raleigh-Durham area. Mm-hmm. So it's mixed. You have a lot of people that are in more rural areas, some folks that are maybe commuting into the cities. And I was at an early voting site, polling place today, and I talked to about a dozen different voters. And it was really fascinating to see the reasons that they gave for why they were voting. And I was really pleasantly surprised that, so many of these voters, they're breaking the stereotypes. I spoke to white men who are supporting Harris, and I spoke to black women who are supporting Trump. And they all have good reasons for why they're supporting the candidate that they are. But it is certainly, I think, once again, if my conversations today were any indicator, this county is once again going to be razor thin and will likely be a really good indicator on who might actually take the full state of North Carolina.
Let's dig into that just a little bit, because the rest of the country has a lot to say about North Carolina, but I'm interested in hearing what those voting in North Carolina have to say about it. Was there anything that caught your eye or caught your ear, per se, as a reason that someone gave you that was perhaps a little bit peculiar when it came to why they were voting for Trump or Harris, rather than just the last 4 years kind of rhetoric that's been predominant in both campaigns?
I was really pleased to see that so many of the voters had really clearly thought about the issues. Probably the most consistent one that I heard people talk about is very representative of the most consistent issue we hear Americans across the country talk about, and that's the economy. Individuals. I had one young man, 38 years old, and his name is Cody Morris, and he said, I'm making more money than I've ever made in my life, but I feel poorer than I have ever felt in my life. And, his message was, things have to change in the economy. And he said, under Trump, it just felt very different. So he explained that was the reason why he was backing Trump. He also really likes the fact that Trump is authentic. He said, I'd like that you just sort of get what you get with him. I spoke to a couple, Sherry and her husband, Tony Davis, and they're both voting for Kamala Harris. And they're a little bit of an older couple, but they said that they really like kind of where she's come from. They really expressed that they liked Kamala Harris's story, and they also really liked the idea of a female president. And that was a little bit of a through line, I guess, with Harris voters, is that they seem to really resonate with who she was as a person, with her story, her background, that she was largely raised by a single mom. I had multiple folks tell me who had just cast ballots for Trump that they didn't really like Trump's rhetoric, but they really liked his policies, and they especially really appreciated what he had done for the pro-life cause.
Gotcha. So it seems like we really do have at least people that are either parroting a lot of what the surrogates are saying for both candidates, And that's interesting to actually see, kind of the outflow and the effect of surrogates going on national television. And they say, Kamala Harris has this story, this is where she comes from. And at the Trump campaign, it's, well, look, you may not, love when he gets out on Twitter, but, you were more successful, you were happier, you were safer when he was in office. It's interesting to hear voters give you those lines. Is there anything specific to North Carolina itself that you got from voters that might, at least to the national audience here, anything that maybe we're not hearing, at least from some of the outlets just kind of throwing up numbers and nothing else?
Yeah. So much of what I heard today, I was fascinated, really is kind of those talking points that we're hearing in the mainstream. People brought up the border issue. They brought up immigration. Some folks, one thing that I was fascinated by is one individual specifically referenced that they didn't like Kamala Harris's record as a prosecutor, and they thought the way that she had dealt with some of her cases while she was a prosecutor, they just didn't appreciate.
It's I gotta say, it's a little strange the way the rest of the country is talking. That when Hurricane Helene came through and caused so much devastation and so much loss of life and just wreaked havoc on unusual portions of that state for a hurricane to move through, I was expecting, at least based on a lot of the initial reports and some of the individuals who kind of flew in to talk to people all over the state, that this was possibly going to be a motivation either for or against Harris or Trump. But I mean, from what you're saying, at least where you are on the ground and in that first congressional district, you're not really hearing a lot about that. You're kind of just hearing some of the same, I don't mean this as though the answer not good enough, but you hear some of the same run-of-the-mill answers that other U.S. citizens are giving around the country on their way to the ballot box.
I would say so, and this county is it's probably about 3 or 4 hours from the area that was most severely affected by the hurricane, if not a little further. It might be more like 5 hours. So I didn't have one person bring up the hurricane today. I think it's enough far removed from folks here that it's not top of mind. It's not first on their list. And the issues that they're feeling are the ones that hit their own personal pocketbooks, number one. And then that issue. And on both sides, I think it was fascinating. And again, not necessarily anything out of the norm, but on both sides, I had folks saying the abortion issue was that deciding factor, whether they were for it or against it. And, I had a really interesting conversation. Yeah. On, some people were saying, I really believe in a woman's right to her own body. And others were saying, well, even though I don't necessarily like Trump, I really appreciate that he's done so much for life. So I'm going to back him. And I had an interesting conversation with one woman, 42 years old. And first I asked her, how did you vote? And she said, well, I largely voted liberal. And I was like, oh, so did you vote for Kamala Harris? She said, no, I voted for Trump. And her reason that she gave for that was, I don't believe in abortion. And she mentioned safety, that safety is really important to her. And she felt like the country would be safer under a Trump presidency.
It really is weird to see in the last couple of years, things, at least in the traditional kind of conservative versus liberal mindset, a lot of things have gone maybe not topsy-turvy, but there's been some crossover from different camps into each other. It's gotten to be quite a spaghetti bowl. Anything else, kind of, before we let you go here in the last couple of seconds, anything else of note that stuck out to you as perhaps unusual 8 days from the election in North Carolina?
I was fascinated. I spent quite a bit of time talking to one woman, said her name is Miss Townsend. She didn't give her first name. She just said, call me Miss Townsend. And she is a Democrat, and she is friends with a lot of the poll workers who are out there standing out there handing out Democrat ballots. And she said that she had worked the polls under Obama, and she was really surprised and a little bit disgusted with the Harris campaign, and specifically its lack of resources and money. She kept saying, where is the money? I guess under Obama, they had provided all of the the Democrat workers that are out at the polls with hot meals every day, and they're only providing snacks to poll workers here, at least in Nash County. And she said when she went to the Democratic offices here to pick up some yard signs, they told her not to take too many, that they were having to limit the number people could take. And she thought that was just really weird. She kept saying, I don't know where all this money is that they keep saying has gone to the Harris campaign. but why isn't it trickling down here? And why aren't they taking better care of the poll workers, who the Democratic poll workers, at least in Nash County, at the polling place that I was at today, are largely older women. And she seemed pretty disgusted at the fact that there wasn't more to be done to making sure that those ladies were well taken care of.
Wow. How about that? Virginia Allen from the Daily Signal, thank you very much for giving us a little bit of a window into 8 days from the election there in the crucial state of North Carolina.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tony.
We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC.
To protect his family. You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
I gotta tell you, I just read something. I had to triple check to make sure that it was indeed real, and it is. It fits into the last segment though pretty well, which is one question for mail time. last week that we weren't able to get to, but I think is a very important question with just 8 days to go, because right now everyone is looking to see what changes momentum. It's very, very hard to change the momentum of a campaign in 8 days. What you are far more likely to see, rather than all of a sudden, for example, in the present trend lines, because we look at trend lines in October, right now Trump is gaining ground on Harris, and Harris is losing momentum. It is more likely to see Trump start to just kind of ebb and flow and plateau off with momentum, and Harris basically do the same, kind of stop losing support. That's more common. But there are rarely sometimes where you can have a last minute fumble that changes the course of the race. The problem that we're finding in modern politics is that everyone thinks that everything is a last minute fumble. Everyone, oh, they're done now. We see this in local politics a lot. So there's an individual who I'm friendly with who recently wrote an article about I guess, a lieutenant gubernatorial candidate, and the attitude of the article is like, oh man, this is a scandal. Oh, this is going to change the election. No, it's not going to change the election. No, I'm sorry. Little tiny, minuscule. Oh, there was a lawsuit 27 years ago. I guess Tim Walz dated or had an affair with like some kind of a member of the Chinese Communist Party, kind of like Eric Swalwell style. Had a little fling for a while. That's not something that's going to change the election. It's just not. In the same way, last minute, really trying to get him out, like Hillary Clinton saying, Pokemon, go to the polls. The Harris-Walz campaign is actually doing something similar. This is what I couldn't believe when I read it. According to The Hill, the Harris-Walz campaign has released a map for the game Fortnite, which is a game that kids play. I'm amazed at the idea that the Harris-Walz campaign would make a map for players to run around in. And by the way, I should point out that apparently you can pick up a cat in the map, and when they do, it has Trump saying, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, and that's like their big election move. This probably cost a sizable chunk of money to get like a map made, and that's like one of their big last effort. When I say the Harris campaign has no idea what they're doing, this is an excellent example of how. That's not going to change it. Also, with all of these last-minute scandalous stories, with lots of air quotes because they're coming from anonymous sources and they're heavily disputed, why is the whole Trump totally said, I promised that he wanted generals like Hitler, pinky promise, and all the other staff in the room were like, I don't like Trump, and he never said that. Why doesn't that move the needle? Well, for a very good reason. Here's what makes a last-minute fumble. A last-minute fumble changes momentum in a political race when and only when there is new information that has not already been asserted or proven. Now, we're in an age where the proven part is really difficult because it's very easy to claim pretty much anything is either a lie, done for, a claim made for money, or that it's heavily embellished. Maybe it's assisted or altered using AI, or just in classic Photoshop or Adobe Premiere video editing software. Those kind of things dampen the proven side. The accusation side. The problem for the left in trying to make a last-minute fumble for the Trump-Harris campaign is twofold. Number one, Donald Trump is largely shutting his mouth. He's not rambling as much. He's not really saying a lot of wild stuff. Even Joe Rogan, when Trump went on Joe Rogan for 3 hours, which, by the way, I really don't care for Trump rallies. I've attended a few of them. I've covered a few of them. They're not really for me. He kind of rambles on, talks about things I've heard him say a million times. And I don't like Joe Rogan. Male Oprah just doesn't do it for me. I'm sorry. I listened to the entire Joe Rogan Donald Trump interview thing. It was one of the most interesting things I've heard in a long time. Because it was just Trump talking about things that he knew. And by that I mean like building buildings. Trump knows about what goes into building buildings in real estate. It was interesting to hear him talk about things that he offhand knew very well. That's a decent thing. I don't think it's going to maybe boost his chances through the roof. But he's very disciplined otherwise, much more than he has been, for example, in 2020. Harris, no, not disciplined at all. So the first problem for the Harris team is that Trump isn't actually making any boo-boos. They have to go to like the opening comedian and a comment about Puerto Rico to like try to get something sort of. On the flip side, Trump's also got a layer of Teflon on this particular Donald. They've already accused him of everything. I mean, they've accused him of everything. They've accused him of everything from saying that he kept certain racial groups out of apartments that he owned, to saying that he's like some kind of a mass rapist, and that, oh, he's also Hitler and he's Satan and he's like the most evil. There's a clip from SpongeBob in which people are complaining that this imaginary friend that SpongeBob has done all of these things, and they're saying like, oh, he made me serve food to him, oh, he made me use the bathroom, whatever. And so then there is another character runs up and says, he poisoned our crops, he burned our food supply, and he put a plague on our houses. And then everyone looks at the guy and says, he did? And the guy's like, no, but are we just gonna wait around until he does? That's the Harris campaign. They're trying so hard to make a last-minute fumble. The problem is, people already pretty much know everything there is to know about Trump. It's not working. And 8 days to go in today's day and age, when the news cycle is so rapid and early voting is becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger part of the electorate, I just don't see anything in this particular time changing momentum. Can it? Absolutely. Will it? I gotta tell you, at this point, it seems like this momentum is moving in a pretty decent direction. We'll see you guys on Wednesday. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated, first on 93 WIBC.
Fall in Indy, and if you